Brian Fisher here for D1 Ticker and Collegiate Sports Connect. Thrilled to be at the 2025 NCAA Convention here in Nashville. Joined now by NCAA Vice President for Academic and Membership Affairs, Dave Schnase. Dave, thank you so much for stopping by.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, exciting times for you. A lot on your plate. I'm sure you're getting a ton of questions. What is the number one question you might get when you run into membership around here?
That's really, there's so many questions. People want to know what the future looks like, whether it's NIL or transfers or the settlement. Everybody's asking those questions. There's so much change in this industry today that it's just it's a nonstop change environment.
Well, you're in charge of NIL Assist. I got a couple of inquiries about that, and I think there's been some outside question marks around that. Where are we with that, and ultimately, what have you seen since that kind of came online?
Yeah, well, since it's been online, we've had over 40,000 views. We've had about 112,000 transactions that are reported, $200 million worth of transactions. So people are using it. They're disclosing to NIL Assist. It's giving us a good baseline for data. More importantly, though, it's got this educational module. So we have 60 modules within that particular element being viewed by a lot of people. The one that's most popular is Invesco QQQ's How Not to Suck at Money. It's really a great video. We have another one from the Patent and Trademark Office that's being watched a lot. So for us, it's about getting the word out, helping people understand what NIL is all about, even as a place to start.
Especially with things like this, I think everybody views it as maybe 1.0. Where are we kind of going with it moving forward, and how do you see it evolving?
Yeah, I see it evolving as, I hope, more transparency for student athletes and their representatives, but more importantly, excuse me, the service provider registry part of this is getting service providers registered. We have almost 300 in the system now, and student athletes can go in there and find the right service provider and then rate service providers so that others can see who does a good job and who doesn't.
Where are we generally with the NIL regulations? I know things are obviously changing with regards to the House lawsuit, but where are we kind of with NIL as it stands to bylaws and regulations?
Yeah, I could spend hours talking about that alone, but let's just start with where I think we're going with NIL, the rules and regulations. The biggest thing to remember is that we've had NIL rules in place and stable for decades. Same rules in place, people understood them. Dramatic change now, especially with the House settlement. We're going to see a lot of changes that relate to amateurism and financial aid. As those things evolve, you're going to see the NIL environment evolve just as well. Because we've had such stability for a long time, because of this change now, it's going to be turbulent, there's going to be some discomfort, it's not going to be perfect, but we're going to get to a better place in the end.
As we do embark and kind of go down the road with the House settlement and its impact on that, how are you kind of cautioning or talking about NIL with regards to the folks in D2 and D3? Because there has been some robust activity at those divisions.
Absolutely, yeah. For Divisions 2 and 3, they're watching Division 1 really closely. They've made changes that are similar to Division 1, but they have their own autonomous structure. So they're going to make decisions that are in the best interest of them, regardless of what Division 1 does.
A lot of your colleagues that we've talked to either here on set or even just around convention, there's zero focus, zeroed in on and focused on the House lawsuit. What does that mean for you and your job and your role, and how are you kind of dealing with things as we kind of head towards that April deadline?
It's a great question. I don't have a great answer, but let me tell you what's going on, at least in my world. So there's this implementation committee in Division 1 that's made up of ADs and lawyers from the co-defendant autonomy conferences. So this group is charged with making sure that we're able to execute on the implementation of the settlement if it's approved. So this group is working really, really hard, drafting rules that will support the new structure. They're meeting weekly, if not twice a week, to get this done. There's a number of different subgroups. I can talk about those, but the main point is that they're working aggressively to make sure all of the things are in place, the platforms for the technology to support the cap management system, the technology to support the NIL clearinghouse. All those things are being developed so that they're ready to go once it's effective, if it's approved.
What is that process like, implementing a cap system? I mean, I think everybody understands it broadly, but in terms of getting into the weeds, and obviously we don't know precisely about some of the details, but in trying to get that over the line, what has that meant for you?
Yeah, for us it means working closely with LBI. That's the vendor that was selected to build the technology behind the cap management system. In addition to the technology, you've got to have the rules that support those new guidelines, the new way of doing business. And so we're working to set up the technology to test it so it's ready to go in time, and then also make sure that there's penalties on the back end for non-compliance. because the cap management system is for institutions to make sure they stay within the cap, but then also for the enforcement arm to manage and make sure that they are within the cap and then have meaningful penalties if somebody exceeds the cap.
What has the discussion been like around the roster limits and making sure there is compliance with a lot of those? I mean, I think everybody understands it broadly in terms of some of those numbers. I know some of them are not quite specific, but how are you assisting membership in dealing with that as well?
Yeah, that's a good question, and people have questions about the roster limits. Those are the questions that we get the most. Mm-hmm. They're not all answerable yet. We're getting closer to answering those questions. We've had conferences involved, especially the co-defendants involved in developing those limits, and they've talked to their ADs, their coaches, their student athletes. So it's not like they were pulling numbers out of a hat to come to these things. Some people might think that, but it's not true. It's a really thoughtful approach to coming up with those numbers.
I know you guys are working with Deloitte. I think there's been several media reports about that conversation with especially the named defendants. What's going on with Deloitte, and especially how is that relating to something that membership is going to see in the coming months?
Yeah, that's for me the biggest challenge, getting this NIL clearinghouse off the ground. And Deloitte is the one that's in charge of that in terms of developing the technology, and then the co-defendants are trying to build the rules, again, that support that NIL clearinghouse piece. That's one that's going to take time to perfect. We don't have a lot of data coming into the clearinghouse yet. We hope to get full data so that that data then supports reasonable compensation ranges for people to make decisions about what a fair NIL deal is. At some point, people are going to make judgments about a deal that's maybe not in compliance with the fair market value.
Right.
And that's when they need to make sure they have the right enforcement mechanisms in place to support that, to make sure it's fair and that it's timely.
Well, what has this been like for you? Obviously you're dealing with membership, you're dealing with outside entities and vendors. I mean, it seems like it's a lot in this process that you're trying to get over, especially in the coming months.
Yeah, it's an aggressive timeline, so it's a lot of work. I'm really, really lucky that we have an incredible staff at the national office working on all of these things, along with the conference co-defendants. People in the membership care about this. As I said a minute ago, this is changing. This industry is changing. It's dynamic, and that's what's exciting about this whole thing. If we're in it for the right reasons, and I think people are, making sure the student-athlete experience is as good as it can be, this change is really, I think, a good thing to be a part of.
If there's another touch point with membership between you and your office, it's probably the transfer portal as well. Where are we with that, and ultimately, how do you see the transfer portal evolving?
Yeah, well, so this is the way I look at the transfer environment. Again, like NIL, the rules were stable for a long period of time. They've changed dramatically. The one-time transfer exception is now gone. The year in residency is now gone. The portal windows are in place. People understand what those things are. So the rules that support the transfer environment, I think they've stabilized. But what hasn't yet stabilized is the behavior around those rules. So as long as you have NIL influencing transfers, you have student athletes who want to change schools to get more playing time, all of those things are legitimate and important, but until those things stabilize, I think you're going to see the transfer environment just, be a hard place to live for a period of time.
How does that connect with the eligibility piece that has, well, let's face it, been shifting, especially recently, given some of the lawsuits out there and some of the decisions that the boards have been making?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I wish I knew the answer. I wish I could predict where it's going to be. I just don't know. I don't think anybody knows. It's really hard to have a fair competitive environment across the country when the eligibility framework changes on a regular basis. So the board is really focusing on trying to get to a place where that framework is stable, that we have rules that make sense for student athletes, that prioritize academics, that prioritize graduation, and make sure that it's fair across the country. To get to that, we have to have some really deep and meaningful conversations within the Division I membership to make sure that happens.
What has been the membership's biggest question to your office in terms of, I'll throw it up to NIL, transfer portal, eligibility. What's been the biggest question mark that they've had for you guys?
All of the above. It really is, and people want more information. So for example, take the settlement. People have questions on a regular basis. So we as a national office, along with the co-defendants, put out those FAQs. You may have seen those. People like those. They're getting a lot of views. They're appreciative of those, but they want more. They want as much information as they can get, whether it's settlement related, NIL related, or transfer related, and that's our job to make sure they get as much information as we can give them.
Is there something that has been taken off your plate with all this that's going on?
There really hasn't. I think that we would like to say yes, because when things do stabilize, they back off. But in this business, because of the change we've talked about, it's what's coming tomorrow.
Right.
And what comes tomorrow is not anticipated today. We try to anticipate it, but we just don't know where the next lawsuit's coming from, where the next big issue comes. But it typically comes to us, and we need to be ready to answer that.
Kind of in the background of everything going on, really, you guys have been doing a lot of bylaw review work, looking back at what essentially that big old thick manual that you guys have stored somewhere in some cabinet as well.
That's right.
On top of LSDBI. Where are we with that, and ultimately, where do you kind of see the evolution of that going?
Well, the biggest thing, and the thing that's right in front of us today, is how do we manage the rules around the House settlement? We know there's going to be changes, I said, related to amateurism and financial aid. We're working with the implementation committee to get those rules drafted so the board can vote on those at some point. They need to be ready to go when the effective date of the settlement is, in place. But beyond that, and this is where I think people need to remember, that is just one part of this regulatory environment. Right. What has to happen, and I think the Division I membership needs to consider, is whether the rest of the rules make sense. The rules that are going to change because of the settlement, we know those are going to change. Right. Those are the easier ones. The harder ones are the rules that should be in place or maybe shouldn't be in place because of the industry change, because of the changes philosophically due to the House settlement, due to President Baker's advocacy. Those changes are happening too. We just need to take a holistic view of the manual and make sure that the rules we have support this thing for the next 10, 20 years.
How does it work in terms of implementation with a lot of those new rules that might be coming down the pipe? I know obviously the boards, all that, have to approve it, especially in the spring. What's that process like, and ultimately how fast do you think it can get in place there by, certainly July 1st, August 1st, a lot of those deadlines?
Well, again, that's the easy part. The rules that have to change are going to have to be changed in time. The next part, and I wish we could do everything at once.
Yeah.
I just don't think the membership has the capacity to do everything at once. So we get the rules that need to change in place and have a concurrent discussion about the rules that maybe should change because of the new environment.
You've been at the national office a lot. Are you surprised at the pace of change right now?
I used to be. It used to be that change was imminent. You would know it's coming, and you could sort of look down the street and figure out where you need to be regarding the potential change. But now it's just coming so fast and furious that it does surprise me a little bit that we're moving as quickly as we are. If we had some stability around federal intervention to assist with some of this stuff, that would stabilize it, but we're not there yet. And we're working with Congress to get that to happen. If we do, I think the change is going to be a lot less frequent and a lot less, not as quick as it is now.
Right. As you talk with folks, especially on campus and especially in conference offices, what kind of advice would you give them just to kind of navigate all these choppy waters right now?
Yeah, keep the mission in mind. Think about what's most important, and what's most important is developing the student athlete. Academically, giving them an environment to keep competing that's fair, where they can use their talents to the best of their ability. That's the North Star. If we stay close to that, we should be okay. When we start getting individual interests that drive something other than that North Star, that's when it becomes a challenge, and it's hard for all of us.
Well, that's a great note to end it on, and appreciate the time for stopping by here, Dave, at the 2025 NCAA Convention in Nashville.
Thank you so much.